What's up, everyone? Welcome to a super exciting interview we have today with John Jefferies. John has been a marketing leader in the Web3 and even just broader tech space for over a decade. He's been the CMO of CipherTrace, which is a blockchain analytics brand that raised, $45 million?
42, yes.
He's seen companies from early stage through serious funding rounds and then obviously acquisition. Most recently, CMO of Blocknative, a blockchain infrastructure company. I think you just raised, 15 million in
Correct, in the fall.
Raised 15 million in the fall. Tons of experience across multiple marketing strategies, thought leadership, PR, paid advertising, SEO, and a bunch of others. So we're going to get really into a little bit on John's experience and hear kind of what he's found success with. One fun question that I like to ask everyone is obviously everyone's got kind of an interesting, unique, and it never really seems to be like an average or normal story how people got into crypto. I'm curious to hear, what brought you into the space?
Sure. So my crypto journey began in 2010, where Dave, my CEO, and I both read Nick Szabo's original smart contract white papers and were fascinated by the potential. So much so that IronKey actually hired him as a product manager, and he helped us design some pretty complex stuff at the time. From then, I've been tracking different cryptocurrencies. Nick himself had actually wrote the original eGold white paper, and I had friends at David Chaum's DigiCash and also eGold, both of which failed. So I was very skeptical in the early days of Bitcoin. Given my quantitative background, I kind of took issue with the volatility of Bitcoin at the time in the early days. Not that it's not much better now, but quite honestly, I felt it was overpriced at $30. Then I felt it was overpriced at $300, and again at $3,000. And so, if I had been willing to take on a little bit more risk, I'd probably be much more wealthy.
What do you think of it now? Is it overpriced right now? What are we at right now? Like 25-ish, I think. I haven't checked in a few days.
It's 26-ish. I'm a long-term holder of both Bitcoin and Ethereum.
So, John, obviously I gave you a quick kind of layup there as far as introductions go. Walk me through anything else.
Sure. So, like yourself, Ty, I started out in traditional finance. I'm considering myself a very technical marketer with depth in finance. I have an undergraduate in finance and an MBA. So I'm pretty comfortable explaining complicated stuff, which, Web3 and cybersecurity tend to be. I was very, very early in the Web 1.0 space, literally when HTML was HTML 1.0. And I led marketing and operations at a series of 10 cybersecurity companies over 20 years, which resulted in 7 exits, 2 craters, and 1 zombie. There's never...
Zombie? What? I'm not familiar with that terminology.
It's a VC term, but it's also sort of a lifestyle company. So, from a venture capitalist perspective, they either want to see you go big or they don't want to continue funding you. And a zombie is a company that just achieves like nominal success, but not tremendous success. Or in the case of the one that I was speaking about, it was a lifestyle company founded by a CEO who did not care to exit or did not care to go big. It's just about, having a nice, comfortable income.
Got it. Cool. Well, that seems to be a very minor piece of 7 exits and the rest.
But it's also a caution flag, right, for other potential CMOs is they're looking at companies and it seems like, the leadership or the CEO isn't aligned with your long-term goals financially, then that can be problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Web3 space, obviously you have a ton of experience on the security side, and I want to get into what kind of led you into, like, I guess the marketing for security-focused businesses, because that's definitely like a niche of a niche of a niche.
Yeah, and in that sense, even though I was working in the internet during what's called the Web 2.0 days, I never ever felt that I was in Web 2.0. So I was literally one of the very first webmasters, which is a term that makes people giggle now, on the planet, working for a Fortune 500 computer company at the time. And many of us know the original version of the internet had absolutely no security. It was more about just wide open comms and little security. So security was really one of the first problems that needed to be solved. And in many respects, I kind of feel like the same problem exists today in Web3, where we really need to address the security concerns to achieve the next level of growth.
I imagine it's mostly a B2B type style of marketing, correct? There's not a whole lot of consumers that are buying security.
It's both. So, I'll discuss that probably with the first company that I'll speak about, which is IronKey. And IronKey had a product that was a retail product. I had a retail store, sold 100K worth of it a day or a month, sorry. And that ended up funding all of my direct advertisements. So in that case, it was a B2B2C situation. And so It varies, and I find in at Blocknative, for example, as well, it is in fact B2B2C, where we sell or we do business with foundations. We have end user and end user customers, and we also have both dApp and trader customers. So it's B2B and B2C, and many times it's an indirect B2B through B2C. So where it's the the users that attract the use cases for the various different foundations.
Got it. Cool. The other roles also kind of that same model, or mostly B2B?
Somewhat. I'll take a step back and talk about some of my what I've done in crypto, which I've basically done four things that I'm fairly proud of. It was at the Samsung Innovation Center, and I did innovation sort of at the intersection of blockchain and IoT, which was fascinating. I also grew and launched the CipherTrace brand as the initial marketing hire, and as you suggested, grew that until the acquisition by MasterCard in the fall of 2021. I also I founded and I'm chairman of the Travel Rule Information Sharing Alliance, which is a public good and a nonprofit that basically delivers secure and open source infrastructure for centralized exchanges to be able to follow global AML regulation. And then most recently, I started the marketing department at Blocknative, and really feel that I've been able to build the best marketing team in Web3, and also raise the visibility of the pre-chain layer, which is sometimes called the mempool, which a couple of years ago had very, very, very little visibility.
Yeah, speaking to increasing visibility, explain that in, I guess, simple terms, what that pre-chain layer actually is, because I'm sure a ton of people are not super savvy on it.
Sure, and the simplest way I have to explain to it is, just like a credit card transaction, it's not final until it's final, and so there's a moment in time on the Ethereum blockchain, it's 12 seconds, where you sign a transaction and it's floating around in the ether somewhere. You don't know what's happening with it. And then, you might be checking Etherscan every couple seconds to see if it lands on chain. But in that time, 12 seconds, or it could be, multiple blocks, there's a lot of uncertainty. It's been called the dark forest because there's adversaries out there that are trying to take advantage of certain positions, and you're very much blind. So what we do is we provide the ability to both observe and orchestrate transactions while they're in flight.
Who, I guess, is like obviously that's a highly technical concept and product and business. Who really is like the target demographic that you're going after?
It is, as I said, it's both B2C and B2B. So, we have a mempool explorer, which allows any end user for free to sort of watch their transaction while it's in flight. It's kind of like Etherscan for the mempool. And that's just, and I advise anyone I talk to, anyone who asks me about crypto, to sign up for it. It's free, and you can watch your own wallet, and you can watch your transactions in flight, so if they need to be canceled or paused, or if you need to add more gas. So it's an incredible tool, and we continue to add functionality to it. We also sell to the foundations themselves. So Polygon is one of our customers, and we support them with both our gas platform, because we have this sort of our superpower is the ability to literally see into the future. So we can see blocks as they're being constructed on the blockchain. We have by far the best gas fee prediction model on the planet. In fact, the Ethereum Foundation used our gas platform as they were planning out EIP 1559, which is the advances in the gas algorithm that occurred at the infrastructure layer. We also have sort of different types of end users, in that we have an open source platform that helps dApps onboard multiple different wallets in a very user-friendly or developer-friendly methodology. So we have dApp developers. We work very closely with the wallet community. So over 50 wallets are integrated into our Web3 onboard, which is our open source product. And then the dApps themselves will actually use our mempool API to provide real-time notifications to end users, so they know what's happening with their transaction in real time. And then obviously the 12-second time advantage is a real advantage for active traders. So the trading community also is one of our key user groups as well.
Yeah, the profile sounds quite complex. It's not like the kind of business where there's one person you're going after for one product, and you can really simply build some kind of messaging that works for them. It sounds like it's a whole different profile. list of personas you're going after. Did you, I guess, going into like your role as CMO at Blocknative, like when you first started, did that like kind of dynamic exist, or is that something that you kind of identified over time?
I would say it already existed. We were in conversations with Polygon before I joined, so it wasn't the MVP hadn't been proven out yet. The trader and dApp community were definitely part of our demographic.
Got it. So I guess month one, you're coming into Blocknative as CMO, starting from the ground up, the whole marketing team. Was there a point where you were trying to do it all on your own, as I know a lot of CMOs do, or did you say, what, there's so much complexity here, there's just absolutely no way that I'm going to get this done with myself or even a small team, and I have to build this out? Like, how quickly did that conversation happen?
Prior to joining the company, I had some long conversations with my CEO and literally created a budget and milestones for the first 3 months, which included hiring. But at the time, 2 years ago, hiring was very, very difficult. So that was one of my major constraints, was be able to ramp the team fast enough. And my personal approach is always to try to do the thing first myself, and then either hire in or outsource, somebody who's better at it than me to actually follow through. But that way I'm able to sort of understand the nuances and test different, characteristics to see what works. But the intent was always to build, a small team and a small army of contract agencies to help with the work.
Got it. Yeah, you were saying you're really proud and happy with the team that you did end up building. What is it about the team that you are proud of, that you feel makes them one of the best teams in Web3 marketing, as you put it?
That's a really good question. They're all extremely competent at what they do. So they're very specialized, but very collaborative. I personally like to race things, cars and boats and things like that. And I feel having team members that are competitive outside of work helps them be very competitive inside work. So my whole team is very focused on winning. They all have their own distinct functional area, but we also collaborate very tightly together. So we have daily stand-ups where we agree on priorities for the week. We monitor them throughout the day or throughout the week, and have collaborative work sessions as well. But the depth of their knowledge and their capabilities are second to none.
Got it. What do you, I guess, look for when you're making a marketing hire beyond the competitive nature?
I look for a high level of curiosity and intellect, right? Especially in Web3, because it's changing so quickly. You have to be curious or you're going to be left behind. Even if you think what you know today, it'll be outdated in 6 weeks. Yeah. And it's also intellectually taxing, right? Because it's complicated stuff. At least the stuff we do is intellectually taxing.
Yeah, that's something that we've always dealt with at CoinMount, is the question of, like, when we're making a hire, do we hire a really experienced marketer that maybe understands Web3, or the opposite, someone that really understands Web3 and has maybe a level of marketing experience that we can work with at least? Do you look for, because I imagine the talent pool is not super great to pull marketers from that have such a high technical understanding of the Blocknative's platform? How do you approach that? Is it we're looking for just a certain level of marketing experience and we can teach the rest, or what?
No, I'm looking for both. I want it all. Has worked in crypto before. They've worked at companies that I admire. Some of them had worked with me, and they all bring their own depth of expertise in their subject matters around crypto. It's and that really is kind of what makes the dream team.
I'm curious. Do you see yourself like a T-shaped marketer, or is there an area of specialty that you have as far as depth in thought leadership or PR or SEO, or do you not kind of yourself that way?
I think of myself as like a 0 to 50 sort of 0 to 60 marketer, right? That's where kind of my sweet spot is, around ramping revenues from like almost nothing to 50, 60 million. And I'm surely capable of going beyond, but I feel like that's the exciting part, the creative part, and also where a lot of the value is created. And it's fun. In racing sailboats, it's funner to be on a mid-sized boat than being on a monster yacht, because on a monster yacht, you just have a very small role to play. Uh-huh. And, even in my team, which is fairly small, they all have a very wide area of responsibility.
Yeah, I know you've done with Blocknative. You've had a pretty broad level of like different channels that you've tried? You've done paid social ads, I understand, the SEO, content marketing. Like, what kind of led to that strategy? What have you been focusing on? Where have you been finding success? Walk me through that a little bit.
Sure. And I say it's different everywhere. And I think if anyone thinks they know the answers, they're probably wrong. What I like to do is test. And this is why I like to do some things myself, right? And test and see what happens. So we've experimented, with display advertisement, which didn't work. We've had some success with search engine advertising, which has been somewhat effective. But the SEO is really sort of what generated the juice. And also some of the ability to retarget through LinkedIn has been spectacular. I will have to say we had some success with Twitter advertising, but that sort of has declined in effectiveness over the last year. So
Okay.
advertising isn't a big part for us right now.
Okay. Mostly content.
Content, we do a lot of blogging. So we have, really sort of 101 level and 201 level technical blogs about very timely issues. So as the Ethereum chain and network continues to evolve rapidly, we try to stay on the cutting edge of what people are interested in and write about that.
Is that like an SEO play, or is that more of a thought leadership building play?
So SEO for sure. We get a lot of inbound, but I'm always amazed. I was at the Science of Blockchain conference last week, and people literally came up to my team and they're like, "We love your content. We read it whenever we need to understand something. We go to the Blocknative site," and so it's helped create awareness, but also thought leadership as well.
Yeah, I know it played that kind of style played well for you at CipherTrace with those reports that you were putting out that were getting picked up like everywhere. The New York Times, Washington. Not Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. It seems to be working honestly for a lot of people. There's so many, I guess, like fakers in the Web3 world that creating content that proves you know what you're talking about goes a long way. It seems like,
and using data, having insightful data that no one else has access to, is really also an extremely powerful tool.
Again, all that stuff that you did with the reports and them getting picked up, obviously thought leadership building play. Do you feel like that's kind of the most effective for the companies that you've worked at? Let's just focus on CipherTrace and Blocknative. Has thought leadership been a primary driver?
Yeah, I would say at CipherTrace, advertising was a lot more effective, and particularly podcast advertising. I spent a lot of money sponsoring the Unchained podcast for 18 months straight. And I know for a fact that was effective at building awareness because many senior executives at financial institutions later commented to our team that they had heard about us through those ads. And so, well, at the time, 5 years ago, there weren't as many podcasts as there were now, and it was very hard to get on Unchained. The podcast strategy from Blocknative has been extremely effective as well, where Matt, our CEO, has got on 20 plus major podcasts and has really become a voice of authority for Blocknative and in the space in general.
Yeah, I was in the press room on Blocknative's website, and the amount of coverage that goes out on such a consistent basis is super interesting. I think the kind of thing that listeners of this podcast would probably find interesting to see what type of coverage is possible and things like that. Because you've been everywhere. I mean, Blockworks, Cointelegraph, The Block, East Denver, everywhere.
Yeah, and with each company, things started to change, right? So with CipherTrace, we had some focus on TradFi as well as government. So it was very much industry pubs and business publications that matter. At Blocknative, those publications don't matter as much to us. So our focus and my directive to the PR team was get Matt on as many high profile podcasts as possible. And a lot of the news right now is also spread via Twitter. So we have a very active strategy with respect to just Twitter streams and Twitter threads.
Got it. Is it like a kind of internally incubated growth on Twitter, meaning like you have a social media manager that you like and that's going well, or is it more of like using external accounts and collaborations that you've been focusing on?
I wish I had an internal social person. That would be awesome, but I don't. So my head of content, as he creates content, he simultaneously creates the tweets or the Twitter threads that correspond to that. So with everything we do, there's a tweet, there's a LinkedIn post, and we make sure that we extend the social reach to the extent possible through that.
Got it. Yeah, I don't know if Gary Vee actually invented it, but he's definitely the one that people love to attribute that kind of style of one piece of content made into 10 pieces of content.
I would say that that's one of the powers that the generative AI brings to the table is you can start with that one piece of content, right? And it can, create repurposed versions, not perfect ones that need tuning, but it can really help accelerate that path to multi-channel distribution.
Yeah, I think it's easier than ever, and it's just the trend is continuing to just go in that direction where it's so much more easier now to be omni-channel than it ever was, as far as like content-driven platforms like Twitter or wherever it might be.
And I would say the reverse is also true. And I think one of the banes of my existence is, all the numerous different
Yeah, that's
inbound
true.
channels, right?
Yeah, now
So,
there's so many channels. Yeah, that's true.
yeah, and so that becomes, creates a challenge to track and manage, conversations and, understand where we're at with different relationships.
Yeah, so I want to change gears slightly because a lot of the companies that I speak to all the time, they're either pre-funding or just recently post-funding, and you've been through so many funding, events. I'm curious to hear what like marketing pre-funding looks like versus post-funding, how strategies change if they do. I'd love to hear a little bit more on that.
The secret is, yes, they change. They change quite a bit, and I think at various different stages, there's different goals that you're trying to achieve, right? So at a seed stage, you're really focused on building awareness, making sure people recognize your brand, and one of my goals has often been to be considered every time somebody makes a use, purchase, or writing decision about our whatever that topic is. So in our case, it would be the pre-chain layer. In case, it would be blockchain analytics. But we want to make sure that we're one of the top 3 companies that people are considering as they're thinking about that space. And that's really kind of the goal of the early stage. And that's why I lean on PR, and PR can often be the first thing I turn on when I step into a role as the first marketing person. I think this, once you're looking at a Series A, people have heard of you. You've probably found some early advocates, people that love the product, and it's really about testing and improving the product market fit to figure out if people will actually pay for this thing, how much they'll pay for it, and start to experiment with different scaling techniques. Whatever that is, whatever the way you bring users and prospects into the top of the funnel. The B series round is kind of testing those out. So is it SEO, like your earlier questions? Is it SEO? Is it advertisement? Is it digital events? And how do you balance those? And then by the time you're bringing in your series B, it's really Series B and Series C are really growth rounds, right? So in theory, you already have product market fit. In theory, you know how to grow, and then it's really about scaling that growth and sort of the science of scaling.
Well, when in the rounds that you've had, has it typically been like, look, we just raised money, we're going to go out and build we're going to double the size of our marketing team or triple the size of it, or is it, look, we're going to start using the same kind of core team, maybe add a person or two, and then just really double down on what's worked for us? Like, how does that work as far as personnel in your experience?
I think the scenario I laid out is sort of the perfect path, and I'm not sure how many times you've been on the perfect path, but yeah. I haven't. So everything is always slightly disruptive and not as clean as I just stated. So, in the case of CipherTrace, we were very, very close to the final days of closing our Series B round late in February of 2020, which, if you remember, that wasn't a good time, right? And so very early in March, as we were supposed to close, the venture capitalist community just stopped writing checks. Like, there was just no more investments being done. And so while I was on a trajectory and we already had fit and were looking to overtake the number 1 player, we didn't raise funding at that point, and it took many, many more months, many quarters after that. So, while I had my foot on the gas fully, we had to tap the brake and figure out how to glide without losing our position. Then likewise, the case with Blocknative, right around when we closed our funding, or as we were closing our funding, the Ethereum network itself was undergoing like a significant change. And so that significant change was the move from work to proof of stake. And that actually created some really interesting dynamics around block building of the Ethereum blocks of transactions. And so part of the reason that we were able to close our funding, part of the reason we were funded at that point in time, was actually to pursue the block building efforts and really start to become very core to the central of the Ethereum network.
If you were to start a company now, or take on the CMO role of an early stage company that either was totally bootstrapping or limited funding, let's say under $1 million or $2 million, what would you be focusing on?
I'd be focused on early adopters, early users, what they care about, understanding their needs, their wants, and the value we bring to the table.
What about channel wise? Where would you dedicate budget?
Once again, in the spirit of like trying everything first, channel wise, I'd focused on a direct channel. So I'd want to have sort of our people talking to the end users or to, to be as close to the consumers of the product as possible. But once again, that kind of depends, right?
Yeah, of course. Of course, what you're going to do for like a mobile wallet's going to be totally different than an exchange and whatever it might be. Mistakes. Everyone's made them, especially in the marketing world, and especially when you bring on the strategy of let's try a bunch of things, see what works, and cut what doesn't. Mistakes are just kind of an inevitably planned part of the process. What would you say are kind of the biggest, I guess, marketing regrets you've made or mistakes you've made that you're willing to discuss?
Well, I often try to move too fast. So, like coming out of the gate at Blocknative, I brought on 5 or 6 agencies in the first 6 weeks, and I probably should have paced that a little bit more because not that they weren't competent, but it just as you're ramping yourself, it's also hard to ramp many folks. I think, well, career wise, one of the mistakes I made early on in my career was simply not marketing myself, where thinking that the work spoke for itself, and my companies were successful, so people knew that I did the work. And so I think CMOs need to walk a fine line between making sure they market themselves without being perceived as self-promotional.
How would you do that? Just kind of content creation on social media, for example, or that's what comes to me as far as like building a personal brand, especially in the Web3 space, is Twitter or LinkedIn. Would you agree?
Yeah, but when I promote things on social media, it's not me, it's my company, right?
Yeah.
And so it's through my actions that they're able to see it versus some of the folks in my CMO community will spend a lot of time talking about what they did, or it's all about them. So I think from my perspective, it still is all about the company and all about the entity that I'm working for.
Yeah, I feel like now more than ever that strategy is working in a dual sense of working well for the company as well as for the actual person, employee doing the work of this kind of like style of creating content about what's being done kind of behind the scenes. Like I'm so proud of my team. We just accomplished this, we led this department to this amount of growth. I feel like more than ever that kind of style is working well. And I feel like a lot of companies, especially in the media space, I think Blockworks does this really well. I think Morning Brew in the Web2 space, or I guess just broader business space, does this well. It's interesting. It's cool to see. It's something that we've recently started kind of prioritizing within CoinBound as well as just kind of brand advocates internally. Switch gears again. Compliance in the marketing space, you've spoken about quite a bit in the past. What do you kind of foresee the, I guess, short-term, mid-term with, marketing compliance in crypto?
Sure. For better or for worse, I have a depth of experience in the compliance space. I run a nonprofit, as I said earlier, and the original vision with CipherTrace was to make cryptocurrencies safe and trusted, both by governments, by end users, and by traditional finance. And it is really hard to get people to understand the nuances and the differences, and not try to apply cookie cutter approaches. One of the things that I've always said is that without the forbearance and understanding of regulators, that the industry simply will not thrive. We could be crushed. Obviously there's ways that crypto will never die, and you and I can hand each other our paper keys all day long, but that's not a scalable industry, right? So I think we need the understanding and the support of regulators. At the same time, I find a lot of the proposals in Congress and the various different bills and what's happening to be extremely short-sighted, and not too well informed. So, between the digital asset AML bill introduced through Warner and the what's called the CANC bill, they're trying to throw the net way too large, right? Where they're trying to include wallets and dApp developers and validators, and like right now we're a relay for, and we relay blocks to 500,000 Ethereum validators. So under some of these new rules, they're proposing that all these things would be subject to anti-money laundering laws and registration with FinCEN, which is quite frankly untenable. So some of the proposals are simply impossible. And there's sort of this lack of understanding that, while a a dApp can control user access through the front end, through the web interface, they have no access controls at the programmatic level. So, you can access Uniswap through APIs and Tornado Cash through APIs all day long. And in some of those cases, the keys have been, thrown away. The dApps have been renounced, and those things are never changing, and they're B, very permanent. And so some of these approaches just don't quite take into account some of this. So, for instance, the CAN-C proposal says in the case where they can't identify a central body as a controller, that they will just go after anyone who's invested over 25 million into that project, which is, to talk about a chilling effect, right? And, if you're one of these investors, there's nothing you can do, right? You can't, roll back the blockchain and get those dApps off it. And so it's challenging at best. And I think we're seeing, globally within Europe, we're starting to see the MiCA bill start to, really start to have some teeth. And, just 2 days ago, I guess, no, the first 7 days ago, the UK has started enforcing the travel rule, which is international AML compliance regulation. And I would say that one thing that happened that was really interesting yesterday was Vitalik Buterin released a white paper on regulatory compliant privacy service. So basically, a version of Tornado Cash that wouldn't upset regulators. And so I think as an industry, we both have to educate and compromise and show that we're willing to take some steps. I was super impressed with Vitalik's efforts on that.
How do you feel, I guess, plays into like the process of marketing specific to the Web3 space? I know a lot of people tend to be, you have some people that are like, kind of screw it, we'll do what we have. We don't, it's never been explicitly said we can't do this. Not necessarily the smartest in my opinion. And some people are like, we're going to be really, really cautious because we're unclear about this. But just that whole dynamic has developed in the Web3 marketing space. I'm curious, like what you see this kind of unclarity and what's, happening with the regulation side, how that affects the marketing process.
Sure. I think as an industry, we need to engage, right? And so, I was originally, not necessarily a cypherpunk, but I went to many of their meetings. And so I believe in many of the ideals of the cypherpunk philosophy and manifesto. However, the reality is that some of these funds are being used by folks that are building nuclear missiles, and that's a big problem, right? And so there's a balance that needs to be achieved between keeping the good actors safe and keeping the bad actors from accessing these funds. And I think, quite frankly, the regulation is kind of focused on the symptom, not the cause. And just like traditional finance, they have rules around security processes and validations and verifications. I think part of our problem within Web3 is that the dApps themselves have been too vulnerable, and it is those thefts that are being sent to North Korea, as opposed to the government being opposed to privacy. I think what we need to do as a community is try to restrict the amount that is liberated from the decentralized finance world.
All right, cool. I super appreciate the time you spent with me on this interview. We're going to wrap up here. Before I let you go, though, where can listeners find you online?
Sure. They can find everything Blocknative does at blocknative.com, or follow me on Twitter at John Jefferies, JEFFERIES.com.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, John.